It's very appropriate that on this day we welcome Adele DiMarco, because to make that kind of change requires leadership. And this is where Adele has devoted her entire career, if not her entire life. She has 20 years experience coaching executive leaders and teams, and she has a true passion for igniting and fanning the flames of the entrepreneurial spirit to lead transformational change, not just transitional change, but transformational change for leaders and the people that they serve. Her business is Yinovate, and it's her unique process of advancing collaboration, innovation, adaptability, as well as creativity, which is the topic of today's session. Her mantra, which those of you who are Bridge Builders alums have heard her say many times, and you're reminded of it throughout your year, we need to slow down to speed up. We need to slow down to speed up. You can hear more from Adele in her podcast, Innovating Your Business, and also on her weekly radio show, Leading Through Your Heart. And Adele, at a time when we need our hearts to lead us more than ever, welcome.
Thank you, Mary Ann. I am honored, deeply honored to be here, and I am never short of truly paying attention to the synchronicity of events, of me having the honor of being here with you all today in the context both of COVID and especially what's going on in our country and what's happened right here in Cleveland around racial equity. In addition, one of the things that Mary Ann mentioned in terms of my my history and my passion, but one of the additional things, because I'm so passionate about supporting place-based change right here in Cleveland, is I have 10 years experience working in the area of racial equity and racial leadership. And over the past 10 years have co-created and co-facilitated with my partner for good, Erica Merritt, who is a CBB alum, and it's actually Cleveland Bridge Builders is how Erica and I actually met and became friends. And now we, last summer we completed our 11th cohort of leadership development specifically focused on racial equity leadership. So I'm honored and delighted, and it's right on time with what I have to share with us today. All right, so I'm gonna do a screen share here, and I just wanna say hello to all of you. I'm very much a group process person, so it's strange for me to not start with the check-in to get everyone's voice in the room. That's typically my way. But instead of doing that, what I want to invite everyone to do as I share this opening slide is to check in with yourself first and ask yourself, given this subject, let me see how I can, if I put it to slideshow, I won't be able to see you all. Oh no, I can't, okay. As you hear this subject, leading through your heart from your creative side to manage complexity and uncertainty, please ask yourself, what is it that I want to get out of this time today? You are investing your time, yourself, your most precious resource in this time we're together. What is it that you want to get for you? I invite everyone to reflect for 15 seconds. And I invite you to actually not only reflect, but if you have a pen and paper close by, write it down. There's real power in writing things down. What is it that you want to get for you out of our time together today? Okay, so keep that close at hand, close at heart, close at mind, and we'll check back in with that intention towards the wrap up. So leading through your heart from your creative side. Oops. See here. Oh, there we go. So a little bit about me real quickly. I already shared, but I'm a speaker, teacher, group process facilitator. That is my favorite thing. One of the things I'm most proud of and love doing is working with groups. And the other thing that I love about what I do is that I have invested 20 years of studying and integrating the science and universal laws of success. And that's part of what I'm going to share with you today in this context of leading from our creative side, from your creative side. So real quick, Yinovate, one of my models, Yinovate Your Work Life, my focus is supporting executive leaders, teams, and culture. You'll hear more and more conversations about the culture of a company, the culture of an organization, and of course, the culture of a place, like in the context of the Leadership Center, the culture of Cleveland, right? And that we are all, from a civic realm perspective, supporting the growth and transformation of. And part of my background and training is as a cultural anthropologist. So that's part of what I bring to this conversation, as well as in neuroscience. And there's a real biology to how we grow and change. So today, real quick, I want to just give an overview. We're going to talk about why creativity now. Answer the question a little bit, is it possible to grow our creative potential, our creative leadership? And then specifically, what's involved with doing that? That's what we'll be covering. So the current context, I made this deck last week, this slide on Friday, and of course, even more has happened since then. But there's no denying that right now we are living in times of incredible complexity and uncertainty. Now, the complexity, this slide would have been true 4 months ago, right? That we had incredible complexity. Things are changing at an incredible rate. We are more connected than ever, and so therefore we are more exposed to and interacting with a diversity of thought, of perspective, of style. And of course, now that we have our current situation with COVID-19, it's even more complex, right? Do you wear a mask? Do you not wear a mask? Do you go out? Do you stay in? Who do you socialize with? Who do you choose, in person? Who do you choose to Zoom with? And then of course, uncertainty. When is this going to end, right? When are things really going to change? Are things really going to change? Who are they going to change for? Who are they going to stay the same for? And most importantly, what is my role in leading in the midst of all of this? So I want to start out by sharing with you, I'm going to actually go back a second. I'm going to share some really powerful research that was done with you. I am a bit of a science nerd. I love looking at facts and data to support how we approach things. And this fact, so to speak, this research that came out, I want to just let you know, it came out almost 10 years ago, if not exactly 10 years ago, but it is more relevant than ever. Now, this research I'm going to share with you came from IBM, International Business Machines, the global corporation. 10 years ago, they did a study of 1,500 CEOs from around the world, from 60 different countries and 33 different industries. They were interviewed by essentially IBM's consulting arm. And what they found through these interviews is that consistently these CEOs believe that more so than rigor or management discipline or even vision, successfully navigating in an increasingly complex world will require creativity. Creativity was selected as the most crucial factor for future success. Now, I want to go and don't see all of you. Let me see if I can do gallery view with you. How many of you, as you hear this, does it come as a surprise? You just even raise your hand, I can see you. That creativity was named as the most crucial factor for future success. Does that surprise anyone? Does that sound? So I see some heads nodding. Okay. And again, these are from the global CEOs, 1,500 of them. The consultants from IBM, these were done by in-person interviews and in-depth conversations to harvest this information, right? And admittedly, these folks they're leading an incredibly complex situation. So, just a little bit of unpacking this, the CEOs told IBM that today's business environment is this term, and if you leave here with a couple of things, I hope this acronym is one of them, and it's VUCA, V-U-C-A. And this is what the CEOs were telling these IBM consultants why creativity is important, is because the context now is VUCA. That the business environment, and not just the business environment, the world environment that the businesses are operating in, right? That's within the context of the Cleveland Leadership Center, we're talking about the civic realm, which includes business, but this is, and beyond, which is why business leaders were saying this, that today's environment is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, meaning we don't know what is going to happen, and it's fuzzy. It's fuzzy. It's hard to get, things are not so clearly, as said, black or white. And interestingly, 8 of the 10 of those CEOs expect their environment to grow significantly more complex, which it absolutely did, given that this research was done in 2010. But interestingly, only half of them believed that their organizations were equipped to deal with this successfully. And they saw this as the largest leadership challenge identified in 8 years of research. So IBM came to say that this is the creativity is the largest leadership challenge, which clearly they were spot on, right? Nobody could predict a global pandemic. Maybe some people have. And then we add to it, those of us who have worked in the racial equity space or in diversity space could have somewhat predicted some of the volatility that we saw because we're aware of the decades of systemic oppression that have happened, but we still don't know what exactly the outcome of that is going to be. We can hope what it will be. So unpacking a little bit more of why creative leadership, what did the CEO say is so valuable about creative leaders? And this is a slide, this is right out of their research reporting, right? That creative leaders are, they expect them to make more business model changes in order to execute on the strategies that they identify are uppermost important. Creative leaders invite disruptive innovation, right? Essentially, they're more able to take risks, and they encourage others to drop outdated approaches and to take balanced risks, right? Creative leaders consider previously unheard of ways to drastically change their enterprise for the better, for setting the stage for innovation that helps them engage more effectively. Creative leaders are more comfortable with ambiguity. Why? I think from a Yinovate perspective, the reason that is because when the world out there is so ambiguous, creative leaders, as we're going to talk about today, they are tapped into their own internal resources versus constantly looking to the outside world for answers. Creative leaders score much higher on innovation as a crucial capability. And more of them, they expect their business models to change. It's not that they're trying to prevent it. They expect that it will happen. So they're geared up and they're ready to do it, which, these creative leaders include CEOs and their teams. They are courageous and visionary enough to make decisions that alter the status quo. And then finally, they're willing and able to invent the business models based on entirely different assumptions. That's a really, really critical piece here, is inventing things on a new set of assumptions. That's part of what's required to truly transform, as we need to slow down, as I say, in order to reflect and check out what are the underlying assumptions we have been making that our current way of doing things has been based on for 10 years, 20 years. In the case of Cleveland, in many circumstances, 50 and 100 years. We have a lot of institutions in this town that have celebrated their 100th anniversary, right? So there's a real opportunity to unpack what underlying assumptions are in there. So we just shared this information, and Rachel, I want to invite us, given that this is pretty significant piece of information, right? I want to invite us to now just take a pause and go into breakout groups just to start to digest it. And the simple question I have for you is, how does this information land with you? What does it bring up for you? So I would love to hear just really short, succinct, for a few people who feel so compelled to share what they talked about in their group, and just actually speak for yourself more so than anyone else in the group. We didn't ask for permission. So who would love to share something about how this information landed with you?
I made the comment that for me, creativity more equates to, or is more closely aligned with being agile, and the need for leaders to continue to develop and flex their agile muscles.
Nice. Thank you, Christine. Brandon, I saw you had your hand up too.
Yeah, I kind of, on the other end of the spectrum, kind of realized that going just through school that we've always been taught for the business models to follow the model. And I've taken classes on just stockbroking, it's always follow the model. So this is really, it's uplifting to hear that kind of the challenges of fighting against the regular just day to day, because there is a better way for certain things.
Yeah, awesome. Awesome. There's a time and a place. Absolutely great insight, Brandon. Thank you for sharing. Okay. So I'm hoping it's clear now that we kind of have the case of why creative leadership is needed more than ever. And I want to talk about, again, this is what my process that I've been developing, quite frankly, over the past 20 years, and really in particular, putting the last little components of it through additional training and research in the past 6 months, synchronistically, timing-wise, with COVID. But Yinovate is essentially a process of rewiring on an individual level. And that rewiring is done to support everyone to lead through your heart and from your creative side. Now, I don't have time today to go into the science of the heart, but that is something I am also trained in. I'm a certified trainer through a place called the Heart Math Institute. And they have the science basically that talks about how tapping into your heart not only up-levels your brain, but it also up-levels your business or your organization. I use the word business, but it could be your nonprofit, whatever endeavor it is that you're up to. The heart is a great amplifier. And so Yinovate is a process that supports building individual capacity as well as group, organization, and team capacity to lead more from your creative side. And so we're going to dive into a little bit of how we actually do that. So I want to start with a foundational principle in the Yinovate process. And this principle is, for many people, quite groundbreaking and new, if not for most people. And this principle states that each of us is one person with two natures. Each of us is one person, but we each have two natures. We have a creative nature and we have a human nature. And these two natures operate very differently. And they're both operating all the time. So with Yinovate, essentially what Yinovate does is supports a person to be able to rewire themselves so that their creative side becomes the leader in their own life on an individual level. And then again, when you're working in a group, that becomes even more powerful, right? Of bringing those individual capacities that have been up-leveled to lead from our creative side. And what happens then is our human side doesn't just go away. When we Yinovate, our human side learns how to follow the lead of the creative side. And most of us on the planet are operating simply from our human side. And quite frankly, our human side, if we're only leading through our human side and not engaging that other whole part of our intelligence, that part of us is flat out not equipped to deal with the complexity that we are living with on the planet today. And case in point, given what just happened, this weekend across the country and right here in Cleveland, and for those of us who've been in the equity space for years, what happened isn't entirely new. I mean, there may have been, it's new in that there was this collective outflow, if you will, of energy, but the reason behind it isn't new. It just kind of, from my perspective, may have reached a tipping point. And that's not what we're here to discuss today. But the point I do want to make is that working in the space of racial equity and really even truly understanding what's going on in the space around race and equity in this country, it is complex. There is a complex history. It involves understanding, and it requires you to be a systems level thinker. There is complexity in terms of understanding we each have multiple identities. And then there's complexity of really being able to have the heart and the stomach to really look at our history and understand how it's still operating and living today. And that calls for a certain level of leadership, right? So again, this revolutionary for many people idea that we're one person with two natures, a creative nature and a human nature. So what I'm going to do right now is start to unpack the ways in which these two sides of who we are different. So let's start with our human nature, which I've drawn with this lateral line, this horizontal line. Our human nature operates from the outside in. It's our human nature. And let me just say too, even though we're talking about leading through our creative side, one is not necessarily better than the other. They are simply different. And the context of our planet today is calling for one of them to be in the leadership role in our lives, quite frankly, to up-level the whole planet, to address issues including the state of the planet in and of itself from an environmental ecological perspective, and the state of our human society. So again, our human nature operates from the outside in, right? It scans the world around us, which is a really important role, right? That's like, we got to know what's coming, what we're walking into. We got to remember things like, you have to know how to put your shoes on and remember to put gas in your car. And to just have the delight of being here on earth, right? To be in relationship with people, to experience the beauty of nature. Our human nature operates from the 5 senses: taste, touch, sight, sound, and smell. We're able to hear, sound, and smell, right? And these are things, that we learned back in kindergarten, that we have these 5 senses. And they're very important, right? They're very important. They're just not the equipment we need. It doesn't have the capacity to deal with complexity. Our human nature is also referred to as the ego or the personality. Now, contrary to what you may have heard, ego is not necessarily a bad thing. The word ego gets a lot of a bad rap. But essentially, we need our egos, like I said, to operate, to remember what to do every day, just to remember to pick up our kids if we have them, to remember to cook, to eat. But what is going on for the majority of the planet is our ego or our personality is I would say, from a Yinovate perspective, is in the incorrect role assignment. Our ego or personality is operating in the leadership role for most of us, quite frankly, and it just doesn't have the equipment to deal. Here's another thing about our human nature, our personality ego side. It can only see in the past. It only has rear view mirrors. And even when it thinks it's seeing the future, it's only projecting something that has existed from the past. Because really also the human nature primarily operates on fear. And oftentimes this fear is in disguise. This is another whole workshop and a big part of what I train and teach on now. And fear it doesn't come out and say, hey, I'm fear over here. It's often in disguise. And some of we call them the D's of fear are denial, distraction, dissuasion, and delay is typically how fear shows up. Again, that's another whole topic, but I just wanted to give you a little taste of it today. So that's our human nature. 5 senses, which I imagine the concept of 5 senses is not new, but here's what's new. Did you know that you have an additional set of faculties that you can leverage and work with? And that's what we're going to talk about now, from our creative nature. Our creative nature, differently from our human nature, creative nature, I've drawn it here with a vertical line. You can think of this as vertical leadership. It operates with a different set of faculties, and it is working from the inside out, or as I like to say, the yin side out, right? And it uses a completely different set of faculties than the 5 senses. It uses imagination, intuition, creative will, memory, reason, and perception. Now, our creative nature is also called our creative intelligence, or our infinite intelligence, intuitive intelligence, our spiritual nature, our highest self. Different people have different words to use to describe this creative intelligence, creative nature, but they're all basically talking about the same thing. It has this different set, if you will, of operating principles than our human side. Now, what's fascinating about our creative nature is our creative nature, where the human side can only see with rear view mirrors from the past. And even when it thinks it's seeing the future, it's just projecting something from the past, a memory from your own life from the past, something you've read or seen on TV from the past. Our creative nature can perceive beyond time. It's beyond the confines of linear time and space. Our creative nature can actually see from what we would call the future. And I say what we would call the future because we know if we get really out there from a science perspective and go into quantum physics, we know that even time, as Einstein proved to us, is a construct. But it's our creative nature. This is what people who are true visionaries, this is the capacity that they are tapping into. Okay, so what do we do with that, right? Well, and really quick, let me just say, again, this is another whole topic, workshop I could do, Rachel, another time perhaps, and Marianne. So what's the heart got to do with it? Our heart, I call it the integration zone. Our hearts are where the creative side and our human side, our creative nature and our human nature, where they come together, where they intersect. And there's a whole interesting host and body of work around that. And like I said, the Heart Math Institute that I am now trained through, who's been around since the 60s, they train people on their techniques around resilience, Navy SEALs, US military, first responders, on how to use very, very simple techniques to engage the power of your heart, basically to support your own health and well-being, as well as to advance the productivity of your teams. Okay, so let's go into this really fascinating new awareness that we have, in addition to our 5 senses, we have this additional 6 faculties of our creative nature. Now, you probably, I'll just show a quick raise of hand. You've probably heard of these words, right? I'll run through them really quickly. Imagination. How many of you have heard of imagination? Yeah. Intuition. How many of you have heard of intuition? Right? Creative will. This is different than willpower. Some people call this divine will. Creative will. You may have heard of that. Memory. How many have heard of memory, right? Perception, right? And reason. So none of these words in and of their concepts in and of themselves individually are new to us. What may be new is to recognize that these are faculties that we have, number 1. Number 2, that they work collectively as a system inside us. And number 3, that we can develop all of these such that they sit first and foremost, and they are the primary lens, they are the primary capacity that we are living and working and leading through. That's the newness that I'm here to share. And I'll tell you, this isn't my unique creation. I have, comes from courses I have studied over years that are based on studies from decades and decades of work. And in fact, my son attends a school that was developed 100 years ago in Germany, and now there are 1,000 schools around the world. And the education system, it's called, in Europe, they're called Steiner schools. Here in the States, they're called Waldorf education. They are based on developing this capacity in children. They call it developing the inner life of children, but these are the faculties that they are focused on. And that model, in terms of tying it to what we're dealing with today, that model was created in 1919 as a result of conversations in Europe, and basically people in leadership roles who were basically working on becoming more awake or conscious, and they saw the world wars that were coming, and they saw the lack of civility and essentially the killing of life that was happening in Europe then, and they knew that society needed to develop a new capacity. And so this is what came from it. So really quickly, we're going to real quick just touch on imagination and intuition and have you ask a few questions. Imagination is most often misused. So we all have it. It's most often misused to terrorize ourselves, because most of us are using our intuition without plugging into our heart, which means which means we're imagining the worst case scenario, right? It's written about, imagination is written about as one of 13 steps in the book, Think and Grow Rich. There are 2 types. Again, I do whole workshops on just these faculties, but I just want to give you some definition of each of them. Intuition, also called the still small voice, the voice for truth, intuitive intelligence, the inner knowing, the voice of your heart, the voice of true you, right? That we begin to engage to imagine a future that we would prefer and love and start from there. To intuit and listen to what our own heart is speaking to us and through us in answer to these questions. What would I love to create? If there was one thing I could do with the rest of my life, what would that be? What would I love to be creating for yourself? And in an organizational context, what would it be like for me to imagine? What would it be like for my team to lead from the creative side? What would that be like? So Rachel, I want to invite, I don't know if we have time for breakouts, but I want to invite everyone just to take a moment and to take some space for yourself and ask yourself right now, this first question for you personally, knowing that you have an imagination and an intuition, all these other faculties, to ask yourself, what would I love to create in the world? If there was one thing that I was going to dedicate the rest of my life to, what would that be? I just want to pause there and invite everyone to reflect on that one question. If you find it hard to answer, one of the additional questions I share with people to tap into that is, what is it that you do that when you do it, you lose track of time and space because you are so enjoying what you are doing? It gives you life. So we have just a few minutes here, and I want to invite, if anyone feels really bold, to make a declaration of what they would love to share, especially if you haven't put your voice in the space today, something that you would love to say, you would love to create. I want to hold that now, and I'm holding space for any questions. But first, and we're going to quickly transition to Mary Ann after this. Does anyone want to make a bold declaration of what they'd love to create in the world? This is your leadership moment and your leadership blueprint, I believe.
Making others feel valued.
Awesome. Thank you, Mary Ann. Who else?
A voice of those who cannot.
Awesome. Perfect relevance for right now. So I open up. Anyone have any questions? I know I've shared a lot today, and I'm going to turn it over here to Mary Ann in just a second. But if anyone has a quick question, I'm happy to answer it, and then we'll turn it over to Mary Ann.
So Adele, we did have one question come through the chat.
Oh, okay.
So how do you balance creativity, being innovative, that innovative side, and the need to execute?
That is an excellent question. And that is why the best way I have found, and that is actually what I coach teams on, is you have to put in place a structure or a system of rigor that you can create inside of. I once heard somebody say that creativity without a structure or discipline is another form of structure, is like an octopus on roller skates, right? But it's the both and of putting like, it could be if you're writing a book, you say, okay, I'm going to write every Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday at 8 a.m. That's a structure. If you have a creative team, you put a structure in place. We meet as a team every Tuesday, Wednesday at 2 p.m. And we share this, this, and this, and we put a structure to how it is when we come together. Then you have the creative space into that. So there is literally a yin yang of creating and being able to execute and get results. So Mary Ann, I think it's time to turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Adele. And thank you so much for giving us a lot to digest in a very condensed period of time. And I love that analogy, creativity without structure is like an octopus on roller skates. A reminder for you can have your creative leadership, but make sure that the systems are in place so that it can truly manifest itself in a productive way.
Yes, and if I can just add, because I do a whole course on something called a K-Ord, that called Balancing Chaos and Order. The tendency in most of our systems is to over-worship the structure such that it snuffs out the creativity. We've got tons of structure in place in our systems. What we need to create space for is more creativity, because our system is built to worship the structure. We need to create space for creativity.
Great, thank you.
Mhm.
Great thoughts.